Good girl. Hello. If you're saying something, I can't hear you, but it might be my end. Anyone saying something? Hello, hello, hello. Someone say something. See if it's my end, please.
Sorry. Takes a while for my headset to.
Yeah, there we go again. Someone say something? Yeah, I've got sound. Hello. Cute. Either people are being very quiet or I've lost audio again.
Hello?
Oh, no, it's still being quiet. Okay, fair enough. It's all good then.
We can wait 2-3 minutes to see if the numbers stabilize.
I've added a 10 18 minutes, so please add yourself.
Right, yeah. There's a link on the chat for the meeting minutes. If you feel like you can add yourself to the attendees list. Okay, I think we are stable in 16 people. We could probably start. Hi, hello everybody. Today, welcome to the SIG meeting. Today we have on the agenda Paul Howard, an esteemed colleague from ARM, who will talk about some work he's doing on defining an API for endorsements and ref value distribution, which is going to be Paul talking a bit and then having some time for discussion, maybe 20 plus 20 minutes, ideally. But then whatever time is left, I think we're going to leave to Usama, who has posted a few points for discussion on the agenda this afternoon. So we will look through his points, and if there's no time left, then we can move them to the next slot or to some other venues, Slack or the issue tracker, depending on what exactly he's going to put forward for discussion. But I would now leave the floor to Paul to start the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Paul, do you want to take questions while in line, say, or at the end?
So I think it might be wise. I mean, I'm happy to take small clarifying questions, like if somebody's misheard me or if I just need to clarify a small point, we can do that in line. I think if there are deeper discussions on the concepts and the approach, or more general discussion, I think we probably should leave that to the end, just because I then can be certain of getting through the material.
Sure. Excellent. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just find my screen sharing. So I think. Okay, is that coming through as a title slide for people?
Yep, we see it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so thanks for giving me some space on the agenda to talk about this topic. It's dear to my heart: endorsement and reference value distribution to verifiers. So this is an activity that I'm embarked upon and looking for collaborators to try to define an API as part of RATS, and also using Verizon, which is a CCC project, as a prototyping and experimentation platform. So I'm Paul Howard, I'm from ARM, quick business card. So I'm a principal system solutions architect. I work in a systems prototyping team at ARM. The prototyping team focuses on how to use software solutions to make it simpler to make maximal use of architecture features in software ecosystems. And we do some prototyping, we do some open source development. Sometimes we are making like strategic contributions to existing open source projects, or sometimes we are seeding new ones. So you have some facets there of my digital online presence on Slack, on LinkedIn, email, GitHub. You're welcome to use any of those if anybody wants to contact me or connect. So that's me. So a little bit of context around what this is. So last week I was in Vienna. I was attending the Confidential Computing Mini Summit. And I know some people on this call were there as well. I was part of an attestation panel discussion which was chaired brilliantly by Mike. And one of the things we discussed is the complexity of attestation, and how we make attestation sort of real, and how we make its deployment successful. It is complex. It has many roles, components, and stakeholders, from the hardware supply chain all the way to running end user applications. And fragmentation is the risk, right? Fragmentation is the barrier to success because it creates these horrible fan-out problems where you have to, if you're having to code to lots of vendor-specific solutions, then that's a problem. It just makes it more difficult. Now, we recognize that, of course, there are standardization efforts already underway in the various collaborative communities, including this one. But there's always room for more. And I think it's useful to use the RATS model as a point of analysis, right? As a model to determine the opportunities that exist to create more standards, right? You can look at all of those components and all of those data flows and say, right, if we do something here, that has some real benefit to the software ecosystem. And then also using open source software to create POC implementations and building blocks, so that we have some working software and not just documents. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is exactly this. It's about looking at a particular conveyance pathway for data in the RATS model, and about where there is maybe an opportunity to further some standardization efforts to create a new API, to define it, not only to define it, but also to use the Verizon project, which is in the CCC, as a way of creating a POC and some building blocks for the future. And this is the problem space. So endorsement/RV distribution. So this is where it sits in the RATS model. So we have our endorsers and our reference value providers, and they need to convey endorsements and reference values to a verifier. So that is the area I'm talking about. And this slide has a load of animations on it that I'd forgotten about. I'm actually going to build them out, and then just talk about the slide wholesale. I appropriated this deck from elsewhere. So if you think about the RATS model, which is a theoretical model, it defines everything in terms of logical roles and flows. But here is a more concrete way that it can be implemented. So if you have and this is exemplified by the Verizon project today. So if you work on Verizon, you will recognize this picture. It's where you have a verification service, and that verification service offers two API front ends. It offers an endorsement provisioning API, kind of off to the left, as it were, which the various supply chain actors for hardware, firmware, and software connect with, and they can push endorsements and reference measurements into the verification service for storage. Verification, of course, does not happen in a vacuum, right? Verification is always comparing evidence against these endorsements, which are the descriptions of a known good system. And we have an API that's already defined there. And of course, CORIM is a data format that is able to deal with carrying those endorsement values from the supply chain into the verifier. Where they get stored internally, right? There's a big database in something like Verizon, which stores those endorsements, having used plugins to parse and disseminate them and store them in whatever format makes sense. On the other side, on the right-hand side, there is a verification API where a relying party can give an attestation token that's been received from an attesting environment to go and compare that evidence against the set of endorsements. And as for the attesting environment itself, well, that has a root of trust which can sign the attestation token, which gives it its integrity and its authenticity. So this is This is, if you like, a verifier service pattern. This is a way that you can implement the RATS architecture using concrete components. And if you want to build a verifier service out of Verizon, it's perfectly positioned with its existing architecture to create a system that looks like this. I should respond to the chat. Let me just see. I think I'm getting. Oh no, I think
no. It's just all informative,
Thank you.
informational
Yes.
stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, so some useful additional context. Okay, just a minute. So some assumptions of the verification service model. So if you coalesce, if you take this existing Verizon approach and you coalesce the ingestion endorsements and the verification API, kind of assumes that there is a fairly intimate connection between the verifier and the supply chain actors, such that the provisioning and the verification can be coalesced into the same service in this way. And also that the verifier service is always available when the relying party needs to verify an attestation. Not only that, but also that the relying party can afford the cost of an online service call for every verification. Now, these assumptions can make the verification service model unsuitable for some deployments. And so there is an alternative model. And the alternative model looks like this. So it has some similarities, but it also has some key differences that are called out in color. So the left-hand side of it looks kind of similar. So we still have supply chain actors for hardware, firmware, and software, and they are still conveying their endorsements and reference measurements through that endorsement provisioning API. The identity provisioning and the root of trust and the attesting environment and all of the interactions there are basically the same. What is also the same is the way in which the endorsement service is storing those endorsements internally, right? It still is the owner of a database, which has all of those descriptions of known good systems. But where it looks different is on the right-hand side. So now, instead of offering a verification API, the endorsement service is offering a window onto the data that it has stored. It has an endorsement distribution API. So this is a different shape from verification. It's not verify this chunk of evidence for me, but instead it is, I wish to verify a chunk of evidence that somebody has given me. So please give me the endorsements that are relevant for this attesting environment. And I can then request those into what I call an offline verifier. When I say offline, what I really mean is that it's not having to make an online API call for every individual token that it needs to verify. So it can make some of its own choices about how often to refresh its cache of endorsements. So it has a local cache, and it can call the endorsement distribution API as and when it needs to refresh the data in that cache. But then it can be linked as a library. It can be part of the relying party. There does not have to be like a service API call that needs to be made. It can just be an in-process API call at verification time if you use an endorsement distribution model like this.
Paul, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's Gary Mondian from MediaTek.
Oh, hi, Gary.
Yeah, hi. So I cited the FIDO metadata service as a comparable endorsement service for attestation, but FIDO had to go with like the once-a-day synchronization for relying parties, and FIDO has a combined relying party verifier model. The reason being that they were covering classes of commercially available authenticators for consumer-facing web services. So it was a huge list. I think in this case, though, with Verizon, and particularly, you're dealing with a much smaller set of confidential compute compliant SOCs. So therefore, I'm not sure it necessarily needs to be offline. I think it could be part of the call flow, attestation call flow, where the verifier, when it has to verify an attestation, can get fresh endorsement values during that time, because there isn't a large list to go through. You know, in that context, right? I mean, the Verizon would be supporting, you know, like today, Verizon supports the ARM platform attestation, right? So any kind of compliant SoC that produces the ARM platform attestation, you know, you know them, you know the ARM licensees, and therefore it's a finite list, and it should be possible to do it as part of the call flow rather than offline. Do you agree with that, or is ARM seeing something different?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I can tackle it from a couple of angles, I guess. I mean, the first thing I would say about Verizon is that Verizon is a set of building blocks more than it is a service, right? It is a set of building blocks for building a service, absolutely, but it is not opinionated about the granularity, or if you like, the cardinality of services, which vendors might choose to operate a verification service, and how many different ones there might be. In terms of when it is applicable to call an endorsement distribution API as shown on this slide, and whether it can just be done in the flow of verifying one piece of evidence, or whether it needs to be like on a different kind of cadence. Again, I guess I'm not really taking a firm opinion on that, but I think that standardizing the API so that, you know, if there are multiple vendors let's take the ARM platform as an example, right? So our ARM CCA, ARM, of course, is an IP company, so we have multiple vendors who build ARM chips and create systems. So I think there is a need to try to avoid a situation where, if all of those vendors are producing either verifiers or endorsement services, that they are not, they don't all look proprietary and different, right? So
I agree with all that. I was just kind of commenting on whether the verifier needs to communicate with the endorsement service in an offline manner or not. I'm kind of saying the scale of the,
right.
You know, FIDO MBS basically had to do it as offline. I'm kind of questioning whether that should be the baseline assumption for confidential compute. So, okay, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think what I'm aiming for here is disaggregating things so that you can make that choice, right? With the verification model that I showed on the earlier slide, you really you have got to call the service for every verification that you do. Whereas here, you could still call the service for every verification that you do, but you might not wish to do that. You might want to do that on a different cadence. So it's really it's offering the disaggregation opportunity by creating this new API for endorsement distribution. It's not, I'm not necessarily being opinionated about, you know, how often, whether you would do this every hour or every day or whatever. You know, there could be all sorts of different answers to that question, but it's about creating the opportunities for greater flexibility.
Okay, thanks.
Can I interrupt you a bit? There was a question from Ned on the chat, which looks like a clarifying question. Does the verifier have to be an offline verifier, or can the endorsement service be used by an online verifier?
That's a very good question. So again, this is something on which I maybe wouldn't necessarily have a strong opinion, right? If we have to go back to, I don't want to fall into the trap of having to reanimate a bunch of slides, but if we go back to this picture, the point here is that if you look at this is the Verizon model today, right? There is hidden inside that middle gray box, there is a piece of data flow that goes from endorsement to verification. There is, if you like, the endorsement distribution API kind of already exists internally within Verizon. It's just not exposed to the outside world, right? It is, if you like, an implementation detail of the service. So you could also have both models side by side. You could have a verification service and an endorsement service. You could have an online verifier that talks to a verification service. And that verification service might be drawing its endorsement data from an endorsement service. I don't think, all of these architectures become permissible when you add to the palette this extra component, which is a public-facing defined endorsement distribution API. So it's taking what exists already in Verizon's inner guts, if you like, and actually, actually creating a window on that and making it an official thing, something that could be externally facing. So yes, you could have verification services and endorsement services. All of these deployment patterns become possible if you add this endorsement distribution piece.
Cool, thank you. There are three hands raised. Do you want to
Sure,
take?
yeah. Yep.
So Mark, possibly.
Hi. All right. So tell me if I'm completely off base here. I have a hard time coming up with a real-world situation that has a relying party do any outbound calls whenever it receives an attestation token. Now, in the world I live in, the most common deployment would be the one where the attesting environment would obtain a credential, and that credential would be, ideally a bound token, and it would be presented in its entirety to the relying party, and the relying party may in fact only have inbound connections, and it would then validate the token based on its trust with the verifier and the trust that is established out of band, right? So basically, perhaps a trust in a signing key. And in that case, really, the thing that we most want, and again, if I'm off base here, we can discuss this idea separately. In that world, what you really care about is that when you perform your attestation, then you have to then do the verification of all your measurements, right? So all your reference values and all that stuff. But then you need to map them into something that is extra stable, that the relying party does not have to change, ideally for years, right? So the message in the token and the credential that you send would be the one that basically says, I am workload X, or the most current version of workload X, and that would effectively be it. Perhaps some reference to something that could be used to look up a bill of materials to see if there are no newly discovered vulnerabilities, but even that it would be rare. So yes, I am describing the passport model. I very much care that one works. And if we don't have an identity service as part of your AVS dance, then you're probably going to have something that's impossible to deploy, so impossible in the real world.
Mike?
Yeah, so I had a question about the amount of data we generally expect to be passing in the two cases, the attestation case and the endorsement case, because I think that may figure in terms of the decisions you make about which model of these makes sense. One may make more sense at the edge if the amount of data you're passing is small. Endorsement.
Mike, you're very hard to hear, at least on my end. You're breaking up terribly.
Breaking up. And it doesn't sound like a network problem. It sounds more like you could be overloading your microphone sort of problem.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think I got the gist of the question. You were concerned about the relative sizes of the data when you're conveying an attestation token as opposed to endorsements. And I think that is something that we have to do some analysis around that. But I think endorsement distribution needs as part of the model something that can handle deltas, because in endorsements I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for, but I guess the volatility of them is going to be incremental, right? There's going to be a baseline amount of data that you probably need to get on, say, the first call, but from that point on, right, it should be a delta, not a complete set necessarily.
There's Usama as well.
Yeah, hello. So I just wanted to clarify this block, which is on the down right side. So relying party or application. So it is a bit confusing for me. So if I understand correctly, what you are saying here is that it could be relying party, and in a separate case, it could be application. The application meaning the target environment. Do I understand it correctly? So you are representing two different cases. Is it correct?
Okay, no, it was a little more. It was less formal than that, really. The box is labeled relying party or application, as in like they're almost synonymous. It's in RAT's terms, it is the relying party because it is the thing that is receiving attestation and needing to verify it. But in terms of what it looks like as a real world thing, it could just be an application or service.
Okay, right. So basically what you are representing is, so if this is the relying party, above that there is your verifier, and on the left there is this attesting environment, and somewhere there is this target environment which it is mirroring as the root of trust. So this is your model for which is supported currently. Is it correct?
Well, so all that I'm trying to present here is a slightly more concrete incarnation of what the RATS model tries to generalize, right? There is an attesting environment, which may be, for instance, if it's a confidential computing environment into which your application wishes to deliver secrets and confidential data, then it's going to use attestation as a gating process before it agrees to do that.
Right.
So the attesting environment may be the target environment. It may be the place in which you're going to run something.
Okay, so that's fine. So I will find my question afterwards. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in RAT's terms, you can think of them purely as the attester and the relying party. But I've used a little bit of different language on the slide just to try to bring some of these things a little more into the real world. I should probably try to make some progress. Thomas, do please let me know if other questions are coming in, because
Yes. No,
I'm looking at the slide on my whole screen, so I'm not seeing the chat or raised hands. So do please.
Was trying to jump in and say the mic line is drained, so you can go ahead now. Sorry for the longer.
Sure. Okay, so I think what's on this slide might be some of what I've just said in response to some of the questions. So the idea of an endorsement service model is just this idea of disaggregation, and therefore allowing for levels of interaction between the supply chain actors and the verifier, giving the verifier flexibility. Basically, it can make choices about when to make API calls as opposed to when to just work on local data. The verifier can be available just as a local procedure call or even just a library function call. And in the Verizon project today, there is Well, I think there is both a CCA token and a Rust CCA token repo. I've used the Rust one just as a sort of arbitrary choice. But within the Verizon project, there is an example of such a thing. So a library-based verifier, which can, in this case, with ARM CCA tokens, it's able to compare the evidence from a token against a set of endorsements that has been delivered to it in some way. It just uses them from a disk store. But if you go and look at that, you can see an example of how a verifier might work without actually calling Verizon's verification endpoint as a web service. And the reason why that's important for this conversation, so just bringing this RATS picture back with that same circle around those conveyance pathways. Obviously, being from ARM, I care about the particular fragmentation risk to ARM because, as I said before, ARM IP is being consumed into multiple distinct vendors, silicon and hardware vendors. I do think that conveyance of endorsements is within the RATS working group sphere of concern. So I do think that using the RATS working group and creating an IETF draft is an attractive pathway to standardization. And I have been shopping this idea around in various communities to look for people who are willing to collaborate and to help to work on a draft document for an endorsement distribution API. Now, Verizon, as we've seen, already has the capability to ingest endorsements and reference values from the supply chain. It has the endorsement provisioning API already. That provisions it quite well for using it to prototype an API to distribute them to consumers. As I mentioned, the Rust CCA token repo offers a good model for a library-style verifier, and that positions it well to be the consumer of exactly that same new API. And Verizon was originally intended for the construction of verifier services, but it certainly could be extended to act as an endorsement service, at least for prototyping and experimentation. But I also don't rule out possibly having that as a feature, to add to Verizon's palette of building blocks for building services. This is something that could actually be added in the future as well. Which brings me on to the proposed prototyping architecture. So this is what it looks like. So the green green colored pieces are pieces that exist. Orange colored pieces are the pieces we would be building. But the basic idea here is to use a new API endpoint on the Verizon service and to use the Rust CCA token as an archetype or as a model for how that endorsement API would be consumed. So Rust CCA token already expects a cache store of reference values and trust anchors. It can read them from disk files, but what I'm proposing here is that we would have, if you like, a new backend for populating that store, which would go and talk to the endorsement distribution API to be defined as part of this exercise. And this would be an experimental process. So this would enable us to play with what works well, what does not work, and to create a prototype on that basis. And all of the stuff over on the left is really just because it's a CCA token verifier that we're targeting. We do need some CCA, some ARM CCA pieces. So an emulated CCA platform, because the hardware is not in the market yet. But we can emulate it. We have CORIM already. We have the endorsement provisioning API already. So it's a fairly well-trodden path to create some tooling that can use CORIM to push those measurements and those endorsements into Verizon. The endorsement database bit of it then doesn't change. It just does what it's already doing. The verification API is not used in this case. but the endorsement distribution API is created in its place. And then we would aim to do like an end-to-end demo where we can show an ARM CCA token being verified and appraised successfully using this slightly different style of interaction with the phrase on service. Just pausing there in case this slide prompts any questions or discussion.
I do have a question, Paul. So
Sure.
it's a very practical one, and from the SIG perspective, are you looking to put forward this prototyping activity as a work item of the SIG, or is this something that would be realized somewhere else?
Pass. I'm not sure. I mean, really, this is. I mean, the work hasn't started in earnest yet. I'm not necessarily trying to burden any particular group with this work. So for me, that's yeah. This is not really something I'm considering. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know where the work would be done necessarily. I'm guessing I would probably be involved with it to some extent.
Okay.
I mean, how important is this question? Is this something to which you?
No, it was just something that popped up in my mind because for Attested TLS we did adopt it as a work item of the group. We had the standardization going on in the ATF, or the attempt at standardizing it in the ATF, while the prototyping was dealt with within the SIG, and it seemed like a good model of work, especially if you're trying to look for collaborators that are not necessarily within the ARM ecosphere, but more generally attestation enthusiasts that may gravitate around this SIG.
Right, okay, I understand. So yes, I mean, I do agree that the attested TLS model works here equally well, right? It's an IETF draft design activity in parallel with a CCC based project to do the implementation, or at least the POC. I think where attested TLS was different was that we actually had to create a repo, right? I think that's where the CCC came in, because there wasn't a project that already existed, whereas here the situation's a little different, right? Because for Raison, it is already an existing CCC project, so this is not really a request to create a project. It's more a proposal to use an existing one.
Okay. However, sorry, just
Can I try talking? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, better. Okay. So just a bit of sorry, Tom, to jump in. Just a kind of note about how this kind of thing tends to work, which is that if people work done, you're going to need to enthuse people to do it, and which is hopefully one of the things you're doing in this meeting. But because we run as volunteers, everyone here is a volunteer. I mean, they're told to do this stuff by their company, but unless you can convince them that this is in their company's best interest, things won't get done. So you're quite right. We don't need to create a new SIG or a new repository, but someone just needs to start the work and get people interested in it. And if that's what you want to do, I would encourage you to do that. I'm not sure. And therefore, 6 people will work on it for 3 months. I think you'll struggle.
No,
to do it type thing kind of has to be.
Yeah, and no, I fully understand that. I totally agree to it. This is about this is really an architectural proposal. What I'm mainly interested in for the time being is feedback on is like sanity checking on the ideas. I really haven't come here to try to suggest that a group of people starts doing this work. That's not.
I think that was kind of where I was concerned that people might be thinking that. I think, yes, present the ideas and do they make sense is a great way of starting it off.
Usama had his hand raised. I don't know whether, Usama, you still want to ask questions to Paul or?
No, not a question. So just a comment, quick one. I put my hand down just because I didn't understand what Mike said anyway. So my thought was that although it's a CCC adopted project, but I think it fits very well with the tested TLS project. And if we have some people interested in this project, it will be a very good fit of creating an overall story. And in short, I would love to see this as also a part of the CCC SIG being done, and so that we have a more complete picture rather than just building blocks of a tested TLS and so on. So I think if we have some volunteers, I would like to see this also being done and adopted as part of the CCC Attestation SIG.
Thanks. Diona had a question on, or I'm not sure that was a question, but she said, I'm mostly hazy on how you even name what endorsements you want.
You mean how do you identify the platform you're trying to evaluate? Is that the question?
That's my intuition. Yes, Diona.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I wonder if that's a good opportunity to just move to what may be my last slide, or at least my last significant slide. So design considerations around this endorsement distribution API, right? It hasn't been defined yet. We don't have we don't have like a first version definition of it as yet. But the things we're considering kind of fall into these three categories, right? There is the trust model, there is the interaction model, and there is the data model. And I think somewhere in here, although actually, no, I don't have it on this slide. I thought I did. But in some discussions with Thomas earlier in the year, we were talking about using the CORIM, or what do they call it, the environment map. CORIM has a way of, if you like, not nominating the platform that you're trying to evaluate, sort of addressing it. And I think that would fundamentally be the input into the endorsement distribution API. That would be the way you identify which endorsements you're trying to get. Okay, so yes, that ties into the bigger question of the interaction model. You know, what is the frequency and the granularity of API calls? Do we use a publish subscribe type of pattern? And also, what does the data model look like? I think there are going to be some things that are common, and in the prototype with ARM CCA, there will be some things that are specific to CCA, and indeed, Rust CCA token already has a CDDL data model for the endorsements that it works with. But I think, you know, there are some types of things that can be endorsed that are probably quite common and generic, like the notion of a measured software or firmware component, for example, is fairly easy to transfer between different types of platform. Things like timestamps, if you're having to transact timestamps to figure out whether you need updated data or not, these are things that would be in the common part of it. Yeah, otherwise the things here are like the three main thinking points around the API design.
Thanks, Paul. Jiri is on the queue. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a comment on tying this with the attested TLS, remotely attested TLS, whatever flavors there are. I'd like to see that if we do start thinking in those directions, I'd like to see that problem bounded, because TLS has a lot of existing mechanisms with respect to certificate management and certificate revocation that I think we probably wouldn't want to tie to this API. So maybe I just misunderstood what the what the suggestion was as to how this ties in with the attested TLS. Like, for instance, if you look at like RATLS, right? The attestation is in the server certificate. So that means that, if an endorsement value is no longer valid with respect to that certificate, then you may have to actually piggyback on the existing TLS mechanisms for cert management, which may be very difficult to do.
Yeah, so I mean, on the tie with the tested TLS, I mean, I see the two things as being largely orthogonal, but I mean, I don't want to speak for Usama, but I think what he was suggesting is that it's of great value to link all of these pieces together and show something that is a demonstrator kind of end to end. I mean, when you're doing a tested TLS, you need to do verification, and the means by which you do verification might be quite varied, but it's just a good educational piece and a good proof of concept. But I don't think there is a direct tie between what I'm talking about here and a tested TLS in a sort of coupling sense.
Yeah, just as long as we're on the same page on that, I agree. They're orthogonal, but maybe it would make for a good proof of concept.
So I think, yeah, that's pretty much all I had. So I think I do have one more slide, which is just like, I can't do all this on my own. So although I stand completely by what I said earlier, right? This is not about trying to get people to do work, but at least in terms of the API design, I think if an internet draft is to have credibility, then it should have some diversity of authorship. So I would be interested in people who are willing to put their names forward and actually be stakeholders. So people who are willing to give their names for inclusion as either co-authors or reviewers of the internet draft, be willing to contribute or review content, and take part in meetings such as this one. And yeah, as I say, hands-on involvement in prototyping, absolutely optional. The only rule there is that the code we write is going to be contributed publicly to open source projects according to their existing license terms, and yeah, that's really it.
Thanks very much, Paul. That was awesome.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it here. I've talked about this in a few different forums, and it's always interesting to get the feedback.
Anyone wanted to ask questions or answer the call for action that Paul raised in the last slide?
So I can go ahead and you can put me down as someone who'd like to be involved. I may end up delegating it to someone on my team, but I think this is important work.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Keith.
Well, my name is Eduardo. I'm with Intel. We're building a service around core emissions and distribution. And so I think this work is pretty similar to what we're doing, right? So I think I'll be able to help you either as an author or as a reviewer. So reach out to me or include me in the meetings.
Great, that's fantastic. Yes.
And I'll send you my information here over the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Heng. I don't know if I can be heard, but
Yes.
This is symmetric to the Verifier API and Attester and Parenthesis Agent API. I think I'd like to contribute as an author. just to make sure that we have symmetry across those work items. That would be super cool in the end.
Fantastic. Yes, sure. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you, everyone. That's like success to me. But yeah, best of luck, Paul.
Just can I ask a question in terms of future editions? And I know that in the RATS model, right, the arrows for the policies are there. Is there any plan to add a policy repository similar to with the reference and endorsements? And just also about the policy, right? Because I think that is where there's a lot of fragmentation in terms of formats used by different projects. So it's not as far along as some of the endorsements and reference value specs with CoRIM now. But the policy just seems to be kind of wide open right now, whether we could use CoRIM for a policy or something else.
Yeah, if I can answer this,
Sure.
RATS-wise, the scope is not such that policies are in at the moment, right? So we need to move the charter to a different version, which includes that as a work item. So in the meantime, what we could do is experiment, and in that sense, Verizon has a policy API, but we use OPA.
Rego. I mean, there's JSON, there's Rego, there's
yeah.
wrappers around Rego. It seems like a lot of fragmentation.
So we have sort of standardized on that because there was a standard de facto from our perspective, but effectively there are multiple different ways to do that. And, CoRIM could be a carrier of policies. We don't know yet, but because we can't work on that at the moment. So, but experimenting is open, right? Is not something that needs the RAS approval to be done. So. Usama, I don't think we're going to have time for your points unless they are very mega shorts stuff.
No, it will take some time. So I think
you can move it to the next agenda.
Maybe in just one quick question about this. So I'm trying to understand that. So it's not currently supporting the RATS passport model. That's what I kind of conclude. Is it correct? So it's only background check that's supported in Verizon.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, then I'm a bit confused because the slide was showing a tester, relying party, verifier, so I'm a bit lost. So how would it work with the passport model?
I had the same question.
I don't think there's a big difference, right? Because either the relying party or the tester will communicate with the verifier, and
I think it's definitely worth seeing if we can draw a picture where we see both options. That'd be interesting.
I think it's very interesting.
Right, to turn it into passport, the endorsement service would have to supply some sort of a token that has the database in it, and then the attester would deliver that database to the relying party.
So this is Henk. Still, I hope I'm audible. There's this reoccurring pattern or appetite for having the relying party influence the, I want to say, bottom-up appraisal procedure, and that's an API thing. First of all, I think there has to be triggers. There have to be maybe even agents talking for groups in place, and maybe this is the time to flesh it out a little bit. How different triggers affect actual conceptual message flows, or maybe they don't. And so maybe have some idea of latency. So sometimes if you need to act fast and have an attestation result fast, asking a question might already be too slow. And so maybe having some use cases helps. So I guess this topic here should flesh that out. I think it's a good co-located orthogonal problem.
So in the case, so describing, the verifier is essentially integrated with the relaying party. So it's an internal, the attestation result is an internal flow.
Yeah, and that simplifies a lot of freshness problems with attestation results, for example, because the collapsed entity is aware. But it also would not really need as many API interactions, so simpler API subset, I guess.
Ned,
Right, it's an internal API, so I don't follow your logic.
So I think Paul highlighted the possibility of having direct API calls, so effectively a co-located situation, and also call out to API or maybe gRPCs or stuff like that that can occur over the network. So not necessarily collocation requiring collocation of the two roles. In that sense, an attester could be split from the verifier using this kind of call out and still adhere to the model where that Paul was describing. I don't think collocation was a necessary condition for the architecture to hold.
No, indeed, it wasn't. I mean, it enables that architecture. It doesn't require it. That's the difference.
Yeah. Oh, we're at the top of the hour now, unfortunately. Thanks everyone for Paul for presenting and everyone for asking great questions. We have a good path forward, I think. But I let Paul and who volunteered to follow up on that. And we have some bureaucracy to do here in terms of deciding who's gonna chair the next call. So I see.
I can do it. Put me down.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
In a couple of weeks. Bye.
See you.
Bye.